The beige envelope in my mailbox had that specific, smug weight to it. It didn't just contain paper, it contained judgment. My wife, Maria, saw me holding it by the corner like it was a dirty diaper. Her eyes, usually sparkling with good humor, narrowed slightly. "Brenda?" she asked, her voice a low, knowing murmur. I didn't need to answer. I just nodded, the corner of my mouth twitching. "Brenda," I confirmed, as if pronouncing a curse. "I'm Frank, by the way. Frank Henderson. Not that Frank Henderson, the retired airline pilot from down the street, but just regular Frank. I'm 40-something, a little soft around the middle, and my biggest adventure most days is figuring out which brand of coffee pods to order online. I work from home, something in IT, which means my world is usually confined to the glowing rectangle of my monitor and the rhythmic hum of the server rack in the basement. My life is predictable, comfortable, and until a few weeks ago, blissfully free of architectural disputes. I like my house. It's a standard 2-story, 3-bedroom suburban affair with a modest patch of lawn that Maria and I spend too much time trying to keep green. It's home. It's fine. It blends in. Or it did. My only recent deviation from this meticulously beige existence had been the purchase of 48 solar lights from the local hardware store. They were a bargain, 3 packs for $20 each, and I'd meticulously lined them down our 100-foot-long driveway. Our street was dark. Really dark. Like, can't see the mailman's feet at 5 p.m. dark. The lights, small plastic domes with a weak but cheerful glow, were my solution. They charged all day, flickered on at dusk, and provided just enough ambient light to make sure I didn't trip over a rogue sprinkler head when taking out the trash. They were eco-friendly, required no wiring, and frankly, I thought they added a touch of homely charm. Maria, God bless her, had thought so too. She'd watched me install them, patiently waiting as I pushed each little plastic stake into the unforgiving clay soil. "Frankly, I thought they were nice," she said now, peering out the window at the offending articles, which were currently soaking up the mid-morning sun. "They're eco-friendly. They make the path look, lit." She paused, then added, "And you were so proud of how straight you got them." I grunted, ripping open the envelope. The paper inside crackled with the brittle authority of officialdom. It was, as expected, a notice of violation from the Eagle Creek Homeowners Association. Brenda specifically, as the self-appointed czarina of aesthetic purity. I started reading aloud, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Dear resident Frank Henderson, this letter serves as formal notification regarding a violation pertaining to your property located at 1422 Eagle Creek Lane. The specific infraction is as follows: violation of bylaw 9.4, aesthetic standards." I paused, looking at Maria. "Aesthetic standards, Maria? Apparently my personal aesthetic doesn't measure up to Brenda's." I continued. "The current exterior illumination present on your driveway pathway is deemed non-harmonious with the established community visual language and depreciates the overall aesthetic value of the Eagle Creek development." I snorted. "Depreciates the visual language? Is my driveway speaking in tongues now?" Maria actually chuckled, a dry little sound. "Keep going, honey. Get to the good part." I found it. The paragraph practically glowed with self-righteous indignation. Furthermore, the current lighting installation presents an overall tacky appearance, which detracts from the community's intended visual language and established architectural guidelines. This creates an unacceptable visual disparity within our meticulously curated neighborhood. I slammed the letter down on the kitchen counter. It wasn't the non-harmonious that got me. I told Maria, my voice rising a notch. It wasn't even the visual language. It was tacky. She called my lights tacky. Maria came over, putting a hand on my shoulder. Frank, honey, it's just Brenda. You know how she is. Everything has to be beige or taupe, or that specific shade of greige she picked out for the community clubhouse. But it wasn't just Brenda. It was the principle of the thing. I'd bought these lights. They cost next to nothing. They worked. They fulfilled a purpose. And now, some busybody with too much time on her hands and a ruler strapped to her brain was calling them tacky. It felt like a personal affront. It felt like war. And I, Frank Henderson, IT guy, husband, and now defender of plastic solar lights, was ready to enlist. Maria, being the voice of reason, and often my better half, tried to talk me down. Frank, just take them down. It's not worth the hassle. Brenda will move on to someone else's unapproved shrubbery next week. No, I said, my jaw setting with a stubbornness that Maria knew well. It was the same stubbornness that had once led me to spend 3 days rewiring the garage outlets after watching a single YouTube video. I'm not just taking them down. I'm going to talk to her, civilly, reasonably. I'm going to explain the undeniable functional value of inexpensive, environmentally friendly pathway illumination. Maria just sighed, a long-suffering sound. Good luck with that, darling. Just remember, Brenda's definition of reasonable is whatever Brenda says. I ignored her, grabbing the beige envelope and marching out the front door. Brenda's house was 3 doors down, a gleaming monument to all things meticulously manicured. Her lawn was a perfect green velvet, her rose bushes pruned with surgical precision, and her porch, at this very moment, featured Brenda herself, carefully trimming a tiny bonsai tree with miniature shears. She looked like she was performing delicate brain surgery on a leafy alien. "Brenda!" I called out, trying to sound cheerful, though my teeth were gritted. She paused, slowly lifting her head. Her eyes, magnified by her fashionable, oversized glasses, gave me a once-over. It wasn't hostile, exactly, but it had the distinct feel of a quality control check. "Frank," she said, her voice crisp and cool, like freshly laundered linen. "To what do I owe the impromptu visit?" I held up the offending letter. "Got your letter. Look, Brenda, about these solar lights. They're just solar lights. They're not hurting anyone. They provide a little safety, a little curb appeal." Brenda set down her shears with a gentle clink that sounded, to my ears, like a gavel striking. She placed her hands primly in her lap. "Frank, they're unapproved. You know the process. Any exterior modification requires an architectural review committee application. And frankly," she paused, her gaze sweeping over my house, then back to me. "They're plastic. They glow that blue-white color. It's unseemly." "Unseemly?" I sputtered. "Brenda, with all due respect, your garden gnome on the porch here is riding a frog, and that frog is wearing a little fishing vest. Let's not talk about unseemly." Brenda's lips thinned. "That gnome, Frank, is an artisan-fired ceramic piece commissioned from a local craftswoman. It's art. Your lights are tacky. They stick out. They disrupt the visual continuity of the streetscape. You have 48 hours to remove them, or the $100 a day fine begins." She picked up her shears, a clear sign the conversation was over. I stood there, gaping for a moment, before my anger finally found its voice. "Fine, fine. I'll take them down." I turned on my heel and stomped back to my house, feeling the heat of her triumphant gaze on my back. I burst through the door, fuming. Maria looked up from her book, her eyebrows raised. "How'd that go, honey?" Did you explain the undeniable functional value? She called them plastic. She called them unseemly. And then she called them tacky again. I paced the kitchen, radiating frustration. And she said I had 48 hours or $100 a day fine starts. Maria put her book down. Okay, Frank, breathe. Just take them down. It's not worth the fight. It's just a few cheap solar lights. Her words, intended to soothe, had the opposite effect. Just a few cheap solar lights. That's what started this whole thing. That's why Brenda felt she had the right to dictate what I could or couldn't put on my property. It wasn't about the lights anymore. It was about principle. It was about being told what to do by someone whose primary qualification seemed to be an inflated sense of her own aesthetic superiority. I stalked over to the liquor cabinet, poured myself a generous measure of whiskey, and grabbed my laptop. I wasn't just going to take them down. I wasn't going to retreat. I'm not taking them down, I muttered to myself, though Maria was clearly listening. I'm going to read. I'm going to read every last badly stapled page of the HOA bylaws Brenda shoved into my welcome packet 5 years ago. I pulled up the digitized version of the Eagle Creek Homeowners Association Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. It was a PDF, 57 pages long, dense with legal boilerplate, and written in a font that looked like it had been designed to induce drowsiness. I scrolled and scrolled. And then I found it. Article 9. Architectural and Landscaping Guidelines. Subsection 9.4. Exterior Illumination. I squinted at the screen, sipping my whiskey. All exterior lighting visible from the common areas or other residential lots must adhere to established community aesthetic standards. Specifically, all permanent exterior lighting installations must be professionally installed and serve a clear, functional purpose. Furthermore, such lighting must be non-obtrusive and designed to complement the natural and architectural harmony of the development. I read it again. Professionally installed. Clear, functional purpose. Non-obtrusive. I stared at the words, letting them swirl around in my whiskey-addled brain. The first 2 points, I realized, were the key. Professionally installed. Brenda had practically spat that phrase at me, and functional. She'd argued my little solar lights were decorative, not functional. I looked out the window at my driveway, long and straight, stretching from the garage to the street. I looked at the word functional. I looked at professionally installed. Then it hit me. A spark. A glorious, insane, completely logical spark of an idea. My dog, Gus, a lazy Labrador mix, ambled into the kitchen, nudging my hand for a pet. "Oh, it'll be functional, Gus," I whispered, stroking his head. "It'll be functional as hell and professional. Oh, you just wait. What's more functional than landing a 747? Gus just wagged his tail, clearly having no idea the path of glorious petty vengeance I was about to embark upon. The next morning, Maria left for work with a lingering look of concern. "You're not actually going to do anything crazy, are you, Frank?" she'd asked, her hand on the doorknob. "Crazy?" I'd replied, attempting an innocent shrug that felt more like a full-body tic. "Honey, I'm just reading up on best practices for outdoor lighting, to ensure full compliance with the HOA bylaws." She'd rolled her eyes, but the hint of a smile played on her lips. She knew me too well. As soon as she was gone, I unleashed my inner engineer. I plunged into the abyss of the internet, my search terms escalating rapidly from driveway lighting options to industrial exterior lighting to FAA runway lighting specifications. It was a rabbit hole, deep and glorious. I learned things about light I never knew I needed to know. I discovered that there are different types of runway lights. Runway edge lights, the white ones along the sides, threshold lights, the green ones at the start of a runway, and runway end identifier, lights, reels, flashing strobes at the end. But the real pièce de résistance, the jewel in the crown of aviation illumination, was the PAPI system, the Precision Approach Path Indicator. Those are the 4 lights, visible from kilometers away, that tell a pilot if they're too high, white lights, too low, red lights, or just right, too red, too white. The bylaws say nothing about lumens, I muttered to myself, scrolling through diagrams of lighting patterns. Maria would have looked concerned, but right now it was just me and Gus, who was snoring gently at my feet. It says nothing about aviation grade. It just says professional and functional. And what, I ask you, is more professional than federal aviation guidelines? What's more functional than guiding a multi-ton aircraft safely to a landing? The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just about spite. It was about logic. The HOA bylaws were vague, ambiguous, and in the glorious vacuum of ambiguity, an opportunity presented itself. If they wanted functional and professional, I would give them peak functional and peak professional. I started making lists. Circuitry, trenching, voltage requirements, the sheer, glorious, blinding power. My research confirmed one thing. This wasn't a DIY job. This required professionals. Specifically, a professional electrician. And not just any electrician. I needed someone who wouldn't bat an eye at a request for airport-grade lighting on a suburban driveway. I needed someone who understood the beauty of precise, overkill engineering. I needed someone, frankly, who had a little bit of a mischievous streak. I found 3 electricians in the local directory. The first 2, after I vaguely explained my project, politely suggested I reconsider my lighting goals, or mentioned they were booked for the next 6 months. The third one, however, was different. His company name was Sparky Sal's Superior Solutions. I figured anyone bold enough to call themselves Sparky Sal might be open to interpretation. I called. A gruff voice answered, "Sparky Sal's, what can I do you for?" "Yes, hi, I'm Frank Henderson. I have a rather unique lighting project." There was a long pause on the other end, punctuated by what sounded like a tool belt clanking. "Unique, huh? Heard that before. What kind of unique are we talking? Disco ball in your toilet unique? Or a external flamethrower unique?" "More like a full, federally compliant, non-precision approach runway lighting system," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "For my driveway, in the suburbs." Another, even longer silence. I thought he'd hung up. Then a slow, deep chuckle started, building into a full-bellied laugh. "Let me get this straight," Sal finally managed, gasping for air. "You want airport lights on your driveway in the suburbs?" "Correct," I said, a smile finally breaking through my own carefully constructed composure. "FAA spec, runway edge lights, threshold lights, REILs, and a PAPI unit. Trenching required, dedicated 240-volt circuit, the whole 9 yards. Can you do it?" There was a beat, then a sound of rustling. "I'll be there in 20, Sal said, his voice now brimming with an almost childlike enthusiasm. "This is the best call I've ever gotten. Don't touch a thing. I'm bringing coffee." 20 minutes later, A beat-up, surprisingly clean white van with Sparky Sal's Superior Solutions emblazoned on the side pulled into my driveway. Sal himself emerged, a stocky man in his late 50s, bald on top, but with an impressive gray ponytail down his back, a bushy mustache, and eyes that twinkled with a hint of barely contained chaos. A well-worn voltmeter was indeed tucked into his belt. "So, the madman himself," Sal said, extending a calloused hand. His grip was like a vice. "All right, lay it on me, Frank. What's the beef? Why the sudden need for a suburban landing strip?" I led him inside, pulling out the HOA letter and the bylaws. I watched, fascinated, as Sal, without a word, pulled out a pair of reading glasses, perched them on his nose, and meticulously read both documents. He didn't skim. He absorbed every word, his mustache twitching occasionally. When he finished, he slowly folded the papers, a wide grin spreading across his face, revealing a gold tooth. "Oh, this is beautiful," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "Professionally installed. Functional. This Brenda lady, she's a poet. She wrote you a blank check for the greatest practical joke in neighborhood history." He smacked the bylaws with the back of his hand. "Yeah, kid, we can do this. I mean, it's gonna cost you. Airport-grade stuff ain't cheap. And the trenching for the conduit, that's gonna be a headache." "Tackiness is expensive, Sal," I said, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the whiskey. This was it. This was happening. I want it compliant. And I want it bright. Sal's eyes glittered. "Bright, you say? Frank, when we're done, you'll be able to land the space shuttle. Consider it handled." He pulled out a notebook, already scribbling furiously. "Now, about the PPI unit. We'll need a good sight line for that. And the REILs. You want steady or synchronized flash." My petty revenge was about to become a legitimate, professional, and federally aligned construction project. The next morning, Maria barely managed to get her coffee down before the first signs of escalation arrived. A truck, larger than our entire garage, pulled up, towing a mini excavator. It was bright yellow, covered in mud, and looked utterly out of place on our manicured suburban street. "Frank," Maria said, her voice strained, "what in God's name is that?" "That, my dear," I said, trying to sound casual as I sipped my own coffee, "is the first phase of my professionally installed, functionally superior lighting system. You know, to combat the dreaded tackiness violation." Maria just stared, then walked slowly to the window. The mini excavator, with Sal at the controls, was already rumbling to life. Its tiny bucket dipped into the earth at the very edge of our driveway, kicking up a clod of dirt. The work began. The sound of the excavator was the first public declaration of war. Chug, 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 thump. A perfect, straight trench, about a foot wide and 2 feet deep, snaked its way down the entire length of our 100-foot driveway. I'd specified a straight line, of course. A runway approach couldn't have curves. It wasn't long before Brenda made her first query. She stomped over, dressed in what I could only describe as power-walking chic. A matching tracksuit, pristine white sneakers, and a visor that screamed, "I am very important." "Frank!" she practically shrieked, stopping at the edge of the newly dug trench as if it were an open grave. "What is this? You are digging up your yard. That is an unapproved structural modification. You need a permit for that." I, anticipating this, calmly emerged from the garage, a clipboard in hand. On it, neatly stapled, were 3 documents: my original HOA violation letter, the relevant section of the bylaws, and a City of Eagle Creek excavation permit, Signed, stamped, and approved. "Morning, Brenda," I chirped, far too cheerfully for her liking. "Just some electrical work. Getting my new lights professionally installed, per your letter. Got the city permit right here. Everything's up to code. Sal here is a licensed, bonded, and insured professional." Sal, covered in dirt and grinning like a Cheshire cat, gave Brenda a hearty wave. Brenda's eyes widened when she saw the permit. She snatched it, scanning it furiously, as if trying to find a typo. She couldn't. The permit was ironclad. But this is ridiculous," she finally managed, gesturing wildly at the trench. "You're tearing up the entire lawn. For lights?" "For functional lights, Brenda," I corrected, tapping the HOA letter. "You yourself mandated functional, and I'm merely ensuring the professional installation as outlined in Bylaw 9.4. I winked. Brenda recoiled, as if I'd sprayed her with skunk musk. Over the next few days, our driveway became a bizarre construction zone. Sal's crew, 2 burly men named Gus, not my dog, and Lenny worked with an almost religious fervor. They were clearly enjoying the absurdity of the project as much as Sal was. The dialogue between them was often baffling to any outsider, but to me, it was music. "Boss, he wants the green threshold lights at the street or at the garage?" Gus, the crewman, would ask, wiping sweat from his brow. "At the street, obviously, Gus," Sal would bellow, consulting a crumpled printout of an FAA diagram. "That's the approach end. The garage is the terminal. Pay attention. We gotta guide 'em in right, don't we, Frank?" He'd wink at me, and I'd just nod sagely. "Hey, Frank," Lenny called out one afternoon. "You want high intensity or medium intensity on these runway edge lights? High intensity can be seen for like 20 miles. "Let's go with high intensity, Lenny," I replied, suppressing a laugh. "We want to make sure they're not non-obtrusive." The hardware that started arriving on a flatbed truck was nothing short of astonishing. These were not Home Depot lights. These were industrial behemoths. The runway edge lights were cast aluminum, painted aviation white, with heat-tempered glass lenses as thick as a Coke bottle. They were designed to withstand the exhaust blast of a jet engine, not the occasional impact from a stray basketball. Each one weighed about 20 pounds. The threshold lights were similar, but with bright green lenses. Then came the PAPI unit. Maria, when she saw it being unloaded, just stared, her jaw slack. The PAPI system, a rectangular metal box mounted on a sturdy pole, was bigger than our entire mailbox. It had 4 massive optical lenses, like the eyes of some alien machine, designed to project precisely angled beams of red and white light. "Frank, this is a lot," Maria said, her voice barely a whisper, as Sal's crew began bolting the PAPI unit into a specially poured concrete pad near the garage, right next to where our Honda usually parked. "The PAPI unit alone is bigger than our mailbox. Are you sure about this?" "It's for safety, honey," I said, trying to sound earnest. "We wouldn't want to come in too steep. Imagine if a small plane got disoriented and thought our street was a runway. This provides crucial visual guidance." Maria just shook her head, a slow, disbelieving gesture. "You're really going through with this?" It wasn't a question. Brenda wanted functional, I reminded her. She wanted professional. She's going to get it. All of it. And by God, it will be compliant. The trench was filled, the heavy-gauge conduit laid, the lights carefully positioned every 10 feet down the driveway, following exact FAA spacing guidelines. The wiring was extensive, requiring a completely new, dedicated 240-volt circuit to handle the immense power draw. Sal, humming a jaunty tune, installed a new sub-panel in my garage, running thick cables through the walls. He was like an artist, and the lights were his masterpiece. Each component was meticulously checked, connections tightened, seals secured. This wasn't just an electrical job, it was an act of precise, engineered defiance. The entire neighborhood watched, sometimes from their windows, sometimes from their lawns, their faces a mixture of confusion, amusement, and outright horror. The Henderson house, once unremarkable, was now a monument to an escalating, very bright battle. The day finally came. The trench was filled, the grass reseeded, a quick job, but still, and all the industrial-grade conduit was buried. The last of the aviation-grade lights were bolted into place, their heavy frames glinting dully in the late afternoon sun. Sal's crew had cleaned up, packed their tools, and were having a final celebratory beer on my lawn. The mini excavator was gone. All that remained were the imposing, dark forms of the runway edge lights, the green threshold lights at the end of the driveway, the flashing reels, and the Popeye unit, which looked like a small, aggressive robot guarding my garage. It was dusk. That beautiful, quiet time when the suburban hum settles and the first porch lights begin to flicker on. Our entire street was still, holding its breath. I imagined Brenda, perched at her window, binoculars perhaps, waiting for me to put my Tacky solar lights back. Sal had just finished the last connection in the garage. He stood back, admiring his work. The new sub-panel gleamed, and at its center was a single, massive, red-topped breaker switch. He'd carefully labeled it with a permanent marker, in bold block letters. Runway. "All right, Frank," Sal said, clapping me on the shoulder, his eyes twinkling. "She's all yours. I gotta be honest, it's the finest piece of residential malice I've ever had the honor of building. You flip that and you're gonna be visible from the space station. Literally. I checked." Maria, who had been watching the final moments of installation with a growing sense of dread and a hint of bewildered admiration, stepped forward. Her hand went to my arm. "Frank, maybe we just don't?" Her voice was soft, laced with a plea. "We made our point. We showed them we could do it. We don't have to actually do it, do we?" I looked at her, then back at the ominous red switch. I thought of Brenda's smug face, her pronouncements of tacky, her threats of fines. I thought of the absurdity of it all, the sheer, delicious, bureaucratic nonsense that had led to this moment. Brenda wanted functional, I said, my voice low but firm. Brenda wanted professional. She's going to get it. And by God, she's going to know what compliant looks like. I took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and fresh wiring filling my nostrils. I extended my hand, my fingers brushing the cool plastic of the switch. This wasn't just about lights. It was about principle. It was about not being pushed around. It was about the glorious, blinding light of freedom. I threw the switch. There was a deep, satisfying thunk from the relays within the sub-panel. It resonated through the garage, a sound of immense power being unleashed. Then, as if a portal to another dimension had opened, an intense, piercing light erupted. It wasn't a gentle glow. It was a beam. The 100-foot driveway was instantly, spectacularly, terrifyingly bathed in brilliant, unforgiving white light from the runway edge markers. Each light, designed to cut through fog and darkness for miles, now pierced the suburban dusk with a ferocity that seemed impossible. The end of the driveway, where it met the street, was marked by a sharp, unmistakable line of emerald green from the threshold lights. And then, the RIAs, those runway end identifier lights, began their rhythmic, synchronized flash, two bright white strobes bursting to life, momentarily searing afterimages onto my retinas. But the real showstopper was the Tacky unit. With a soft whir, its 4 massive optical lenses clicked on, beaming out their high-intensity red and white lights. From my vantage point, directly in front, it was a perfectly aligned beam. 2 red, 2 white. I was on the perfect glide slope. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. My house, once a quiet, unassuming part of the streetscape, was now the brightest object in a 5-mile radius. The light wasn't just illuminating my driveway, it was slicing through the gathering dusk, casting stark, impossibly long shadows across my lawn, across the street, illuminating the tops of trees 3 streets over. It was like a stadium had suddenly materialized in our quiet neighborhood. Or perhaps a small airport had decided to relocate to my front yard. For a moment, Maria, Sal, and I just stood there, mesmerized by the sheer, unadulterated brilliance. Then the neighborhood reacted. A dog, 3 houses down, started barking furiously, a frantic, bewildered sound. Then another, and another. Headlights from a car driving slowly down the street suddenly flared, then the car swerved slightly before slowing to a complete stop, the driver probably thinking they'd accidentally wandered onto an active airfield. And then, from across the street, from the perfectly manicured monument to beige, Brenda's kitchen window slid open with a startled squeak. A figure, silhouetted against her interior lights, peered out. There was a moment of silence. Then Brenda's voice, usually so composed and sharp, sliced through the night air. It wasn't angry. It was genuinely, utterly, undeniably terrified. "What in God's name is happening?" Sal clapped me on the back, his grin wider than ever. "Mission accomplished, Frank. They wanted bright. They got blinding." Maria, next to me, just shook her head, a slow smile finally spreading across her face. "You really are an idiot, Frank," she said, but her eyes were sparkling with something close to pride. "My magnificent, brilliant idiot." The runway lights pulsed, a beacon of defiant, professional, and utterly functional light pollution. The war, it seemed, had only just begun. The light show continued for a glorious, blinding hour. The initial terror in Brenda's voice slowly morphed into a screeching symphony of phone calls. I could practically hear her rotary dialing the local police, the fire department, the FBI, perhaps even NORAD, convinced that my driveway was now a rogue military base or an extraterrestrial landing zone. It was exactly 9 p.m. when the inevitable happened. A police cruiser, its lights dark, pulled up slowly to the curb in front of my house. The officer behind the wheel squinted against the sheer intensity of my driveway's new illumination. It looked like he was trying to drive into the sun. The car crept forward, then finally stopped, too. Officers emerged. Officer Miller, the veteran, was a portly man with a perpetually tired expression. Officer Jenkins, the rookie, looked like he was barely out of high school and was visibly trying to suppress a giggle. They stood at the edge of my lawn, bathed in the white and green glow, looking less like law enforcement and more like 2 startled deer caught in an industrial spotlight. "Sir," Officer Miller began, holding a hand up to shield his eyes, I don't even know where to start. Are you landing a plane?" I walked out to meet them, affecting an air of calm, dignified homeowner. Maria was right behind me, a towel draped over her head, using it as an improvised light shield. "Evening, officers," I said, my voice steady. "Just my new driveway lights." Suddenly, Brenda burst onto her own lawn, still in her bathrobe, her hair wild, looking like a deranged prophetess. She brandished her phone like a weapon. "He's lost his mind. He's blinding my cat. It's a public nuisance. It's a health hazard. Arrest him. Arrest him for crimes against ocular well-being." "Brenda, please," Officer Miller sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked genuinely exhausted. "Officer," I interrupted smoothly, "I'd like to file a noise complaint about my neighbor. She's being extremely disruptive." I pointed at Brenda, who gasped in outrage. "But first," I continued, reaching into my pocket, "here's all the relevant paperwork regarding my professionally installed functional lighting system." I handed Officer Miller a meticulously organized folder. Inside were 3 things. The City of Eagle Creek electrical permit, complete with final inspection sign-off, confirming everything was up to code. The original HOA notice of violation, with Brenda's own words, professionally installed, and clear functional purpose, highlighted in yellow. A printed copy of Bylaw 9.4 with the same phrases circled. Officer Miller took the folder, flipping through the pages. His eyebrows slowly rose with each document. Officer Jenkins peered over his shoulder, his lips pressed together, clearly trying not to outright laugh. "Sir," Miller said, his voice a mix of disbelief and grudging respect, This is quite thorough." He looked at the electrical permit. "Everything seems to be perfectly legal, city approved, inspected." He looked at the HOA letter. "And the HOA demanded professionally installed lighting." "That's right, officer," I confirmed, as if this were the most normal interaction in the world. "I'm just a law-abiding citizen trying to comply with my community's aesthetic standards." "But the lights," Jenkins finally blurted out, unable to contain himself. He pointed at the PAPI unit, which was still beaming its perfect 2 red, 2 white signal. "Sir, this one's got 2 red lights and 2 white lights. What's that mean?" "That means you're on the perfect 3-degree glide slope, officer," I explained patiently, as if giving flight instructions. "If you were in a Cessna, you'd be right on track to park in my garage. It's crucial for safe approach and landing." Jenkins looked at Miller, then back at the PAPI, then at my garage. He started to laugh, a little choked cough, trying to turn it into a cough. Miller shot him a glare. "Sir," Miller said, turning his tired eyes back to me, "it's aggressively bright. I'll give you that. And it's probably blinding every low-flying bird in a 5-mile radius. But," he paused, sighing deeply, "it's not technically illegal. The city ordinance on light pollution is primarily for commercial properties, not residential. And you have permits. You've complied with your HOA's specific demands for professional and functional installation." He then turned to Brenda, who was practically vibrating with rage. "Brenda!" he yelled across the lawn, his voice carrying over the hum of my runway lights. "It's a civil matter. Stop calling 911. We can't do anything about this." Brenda shrieked something unintelligible, throwing her hands up in exasperation. Officer Miller sighed again, handed me back my folder, and gestured to Jenkins. "Let's go, rookie. We've got real crime to fight, not whatever this is." As they got back into their cruiser, Jenkins looked back at me, a wide grin spreading across his face. He gave me a quick, almost imperceptible thumbs up. Officer Miller just shook his head, then slowly, carefully backed the cruiser out of my blinding driveway and drove off into the comparative darkness of the rest of the street. I gave Brenda a polite little wave. She slammed her window shut with a furious crash. Maria, next to me, just let out a long, slow breath. "Well," she said, a new, almost giddy tone in her voice. "That went better than expected. I thought for sure you were going to jail." "Nope," I said, a triumphant grin on my face. "Just being a good, compliant neighbor." I surveyed my brightly lit driveway, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. The battle of the beige envelope had just moved to its next, even brighter phase. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of neighborhood whispers, frantic phone calls, and the almost constant presence of cars slowing down on our street to gawk at my personal airport. My house became a local landmark, visible from the main highway half a mile away. The Eagle Creek Homeowners Association, I heard through the grapevine, mostly from Maria's coffee group, was in crisis mode. Brenda, it seemed, was not taking her defeat lightly. Finally, a flyer appeared in everyone's mailbox. Emergency HOA meeting. Urgent community matter. Thursday, 7 p.m., Community Clubhouse. Maria and I, of course, planned to attend. I even wore my least tacky polo shirt. The community clubhouse was packed. Every chair was taken, and people were standing along the walls. The atmosphere was thick with tension, curiosity, and the faint, persistent glow of my driveway lights seeping through the clubhouse windows. Yes, I had left them on, 24/7, for functional purposes. Brenda, looking like a slightly more polished version of her bathrobe-clad self, stood at the podium. Her face was set in a mask of grim determination. She didn't even acknowledge me as I walked in, though I could feel her eyes drilling into the back of my head. "Good evening, everyone," Brenda began, her voice tight. "As you know, we are here tonight to discuss a pressing issue. An issue that, frankly, threatens the very fabric of our community's aesthetic integrity." She gestured dramatically towards the windows, as if my driveway lights were an invading alien fleet. "As you can all see, Mr. Henderson has undertaken an unauthorized and, frankly, outrageous exterior modification to his property." A murmur went through the crowd. Some people looked angry, others looked amused. A few just looked bewildered. "Mr. Henderson," Brenda continued, her voice rising in pitch, "has chosen to mock the very bylaws designed to protect our property values. He has installed what can only be described as a full-scale airport runway lighting system down his driveway. This is an outrage, a mockery. He has violated the spirit of the bylaws." Several people nodded. Others shook their heads. Brenda, sensing she was losing some of the crowd, went into a passionate, if slightly unhinged, rant about the sanctity of visual harmony and the dangers of rogue lighting. She accused me of light pollution, of disturbing the peace, and probably of causing the ozone layer to thin. Just as she was hitting her stride, a quiet man in the back of the room raised his hand. It was Mr. Henderson. Not me, but the other Mr. Henderson. Frank Henderson, Sr., the retired airline pilot. He was usually a very soft-spoken, unassuming man. Brenda paused, irritated. "Yes, Mr. Henderson? Do you have a relevant question?" "Actually, Brenda," Mr. Henderson Sr. said, his voice surprisingly clear and calm, "I just have an observation. I'm a retired airline pilot, as many of you know, flew 747s for 30 years, and I've got to say," he paused, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face, "I'm impressed. His pay-pie alignment is perfect, and the RE aisles, top-notch, spot on. From what I can tell, it's the safest-looking driveway I've ever seen. If I were flying in at night, I'd have no trouble finding my way to Frank's garage." A ripple of laughter, mixed with bewildered gasps, went through the room. Brenda's mouth hung open. She was completely floored, Her supposed outrage had just been undercut by an actual, legitimate expert. It was my cue. I stood up, adjusting my polo shirt. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said, addressing the room, "for that professional assessment. It goes to show that I am merely trying to be a good, compliant neighbor." I faced the crowd, adopting my most earnest, reasonable tone. "I'm a simple man. I was told my $5 solar lights were tacky. I was told I needed functional and professional lights installed by professionals." So what did I do? I hired Sparky Sal, a licensed, bonded, and insured electrician. We obtained all necessary city permits, and we installed lights that are, by any objective standard, the epitome of professional and functional. They are, in fact, FAA compliant. They guide, they illuminate, they do not merely decorate. I paused, letting that sink in. The bylaws state non-obtrusive. Now, I understand some of you might find them noticeable. But non-obtrusive is a subjective term. To a lost pilot, they would be a welcome, non-obtrusive guide. To an emergency vehicle trying to find my house in the dark, they would be a wonderfully non-obtrusive beacon. Furthermore, the bylaws do not specify a maximum lumen count, nor do they prohibit aviation-grade infrastructure. If the board wishes to amend the bylaws to include a maximum lumen count or no aviation-grade infrastructure, I am happy to vote on that. Until then, I am compliant. I sat down, a polite smile on my face. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, some defending me, others still outraged, but many of them now openly laughing. Brenda was at a complete loss for words, sputtering incoherently at the podium. She knew she was trapped. The bylaws, her bylaws, had been meticulously used against her. The meeting descended into chaos, a cacophony of frustrated shouts and delighted guffaws. The emergency HOA meeting ended not with a resolution, but with a resounding, hilarious stalemate. The emergency HOA meeting was a turning point. The story, picked up by the local news after Officer Miller's civil matter comment went viral, exploded. Suburban spite. Man builds runway to protest HOA, screamed one headline. My house was featured on the evening news, bathed in its glorious, blinding white light. The Eagle Creek HOA, and specifically Brenda, became a national meme. Pictures of my driveway, compared to Brenda's perfectly trimmed bonsai, circulated endlessly. The HOA was a laughingstock. A week after the disastrous meeting, my doorbell rang. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the media. It was Brenda. She stood on my porch, not in a power suit, not in a bathrobe, but in plain clothes, looking utterly, completely defeated. The lines around her mouth seemed deeper, her shoulders slumped. The light from my driveway, still blazing, cast her in sharp relief, almost like a spotlight on a broken performer. "Frank," she said, her voice devoid of its usual crisp authority, "please, turn them off. Just turn them off." Her eyes, rimmed with dark circles, flicked to the papilla unit, which was still doing its diligent work. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "But Brenda," I said, feigning genuine confusion, "are they tacky?" She squeezed her eyes shut, then opened them. Through gritted teeth, she uttered the words I had waited for, the words that tasted like victory. "No, Frank," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They are not tacky. They are very, very functional." A slow smile spread across my face. "Good," I said, "because I just got a letter from the FAA. They're asking about my operating hours. Brenda visibly flinched. "No, no, please, look," she said, pulling a folded paper from her purse. It was a formal offer from the HOA. "We will pay for the full removal of the runway lights, every single component. We will cover all labor costs, and," she hesitated, looking away, "we will officially strike the Tacky violation from your record, and issue a formal, written apology." I took the paper, glancing over it. It was all there. Complete capitulation. "And the original solar lights?" I asked. "Are they acceptable?" Brenda looked like she might explode, but she just sighed. "Frank, at this point, you could paint your house plaid and put a flamingo on the roof. Just, please, no more airport." I looked at the blazing driveway, then back at Brenda's weary face. Deal. A week later, Sal and his crew were back. This time, they were dismantling the runway. They did it with a solemnity usually reserved for military funerals, each light disconnected and carefully packed away. "It's a sad day, Frank," Sal said, patting a puppy lens. "This was truly magnificent." They loaded the last of the components onto the flatbed. "You know, the local flying club offered me a pretty penny for these, said they needed a training strip." "Tell them no," I said. "They're retired, peacefully retired." As the truck pulled away, Maria came out and sat next to me on the porch swing. It was dusk again, quiet, serene. The street, after weeks of being bathed in an artificial sun, felt profoundly dark. "It's so dark now," Maria said, almost wistfully. "I know," I replied, a hint of melancholy in my voice. "Feels weird." Just then, a series of small, familiar pinpricks of light flickered on along the walkway, stretching down the driveway. They were soft, unassuming, and emitted that gentle, cheerful glow. The original $20 plastic solar lights. I'd quietly reinstalled them after Sal had left. Maria looked at me, then at the lights, her eyes wide. "Frank, you didn't." "What?" I said, feigning innocence. "They look nice, and they're not tacky. Brenda said so herself." Just then, Brenda's meticulously polished sedan drove by. It slowed down, almost imperceptibly, as she stared at the row of small, glowing solar lights lining my driveway. For a long moment, she just stared. Then, silently, she drove on. "I will say," I told Maria, leaning back in the porch swing, a satisfied smile on my face, "I'm getting a lot of weird mail, mostly from the local flying club. They want to know my landing fees. I'm thinking $10 and a six-pack." Maria just laughed, a rich, happy sound. "You're incorrigible, Frank Henderson." "And compliant," I added, looking at my perfectly lit, perfectly unassuming driveway. "Always compliant."